You know that feeling when someone asks what you want out of life and you open your mouth to give the right answer? The ambitious one, the impressive one, and instead you feel this quiet pull towards something smaller, something slower? Maybe it's a house with a garden. Maybe it's a job that ends at 5 and stays there. Maybe it's just enough, not more, just enough. And the second that thought crosses your mind, something else moves in right behind it. A low grade guilt. A whisper that sounds a lot like, is that it? Is that really all you want? What if that pull toward a small, quiet life isn't a sign that something's wrong with you, but the most psychologically coherent thing you've ever felt? Here's what pop psychology, hustle culture, and every LinkedIn inspirational post gets completely wrong about this. They've convinced an entire generation that wanting less is a symptom, that it's fear dressed up as contentment, that you need to dig beneath the desire for a quiet life to find the real problem. The unhealed wound, the unprocessed trauma, the limiting belief stopping you from dreaming bigger. And sometimes that's true, but here's the thing, sometimes it's not. Sometimes choosing small is the smartest, most self-aware decision a person can make. And the science actually backs that up. The problem is nobody talks about that version. Hey, I'm Martin. If this is landing somewhere real for you, hit subscribe. I make videos like this every week, and you might want to be around for what's coming next. From the outside, a person who has chosen a small life can look like a lot of things. Lazy, maybe. Lacking drive. Someone who gave up or never really tried. The world has a very specific idea of what a successful adult looks like, and a person who works a modest job, lives in a modest place, and spends their Friday nights cooking dinner at home doesn't fit that picture neatly. But from the inside, it looks completely different. From the inside, it feels like clarity, like you've cut through a lot of noise other people are still swimming in. There's a particular kind of peace that comes with knowing what's actually yours, what you actually want, versus what you've been told to want. And here's what nobody tells you about that. The ability to tell those two things apart is genuinely rare. Most people spend their entire lives chasing goals that were handed to them by their parents, their culture, their social media feed, without ever stopping to ask whether any of it actually fits. The person who has chosen a quiet life, they stopped. They asked, and they answered honestly, but why does it feel so hard to own that answer without guilt? And here's where it gets really interesting. There's a concept in psychology that explains why we feel empty when we finally get what we thought we wanted, and strangely full when we stop chasing it. The idea is this: human beings have two fundamentally different types of motivation. One is driven by external rewards, status, money, approval, achievement. The other is driven by internal alignment, by what genuinely feels meaningful to you right now in the life you're actually living. Researchers Deci and Richard Ryan spent decades building what they call self-determination theory, and what they found is that psychological well-being doesn't come from achieving more. It comes from acting in line with your own values, feeling like your choices are genuinely yours, and having deep connection with other people. That's it. That's the whole list. The research from their lab and others consistently shows that people who are extrinsically motivated, chasing external markers of success, report lower life satisfaction over time, even when they succeed. The treadmill keeps moving. The goalpost moves with you. And this is the part most people miss entirely. The quiet life isn't a retreat from meaning. For many people, it's the fastest route to it. But why does the pull toward ambition feel so primal? Why does doing less feel like a kind of failure even when it doesn't? Even when you know it doesn't, because your brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do. And not just by culture, by evolution. The human brain is extraordinarily sensitive to social comparison. It was built in a world where status within your group was a direct predictor of survival. Being seen as capable, productive, and ascending wasn't just nice, it was life or death. That ancient circuitry is still running, even though the context has changed completely. And then on top of that ancient wiring, you've got 70 years of post war consumer capitalism, layering achievement and acquisition onto every surface of modern life. Your phone, your school, the movies, the stories we tell about who gets remembered and who doesn't. Choosing not to participate in that machine doesn't feel neutral. It feels like falling behind. That's not a personality flaw. That's a nervous system response to a system that was specifically designed to produce that feeling. Think about what that actually means for a second. The guilt you feel for wanting something quieter isn't evidence that you're lazy. It's evidence that the conditioning worked. And here's where it gets uncomfortable because a lot of people don't choose the quiet life. Not because they don't want it, but because they can't give themselves permission. They keep performing ambition. They keep adding to the resume, the LinkedIn, the 10-year plan. They stay on the treadmill because the alternative feels too vulnerable to admit out loud. And the research on what that does over time is not subtle. Studies on what's called goal dissonance, the gap between the life you're living and the life that actually fits you, consistently link it to elevated levels of chronic stress, emotional exhaustion, and what psychologists call identity foreclosure, which is essentially when you've committed so hard to a version of yourself that you can't find the door out. The uncomfortable truth is that performing ambition you don't feel is a form of chronic self betrayal. Low grade, quiet, socially rewarded chronic self betrayal. It doesn't feel dramatic, it just slowly hollows things out. And one day you realize the things you've been building feel like they belong to someone else. Here's where it gets really personal. A lot of people who are quietly miserable inside an ambitious life have stopped thinking of it as a choice. They've started thinking of it as who they are. I'm just driven. I'm just ambitious. I'm someone who can't switch off. It sounds like self knowledge. It's actually a story that's been repeated so many times it started to look like a fact. And conversely, people who genuinely want a small life often carry around a shadow version of themselves, a hypothetical, more ambitious self they feel they're failing to be. They compare their actual life to a highlight reel of someone else's and feel vaguely guilty for finding that highlight reel exhausting to even watch. The psychologist Tasha Eurich, whose research on self-awareness found that only about 15% of people are actually self-aware in a meaningful sense, describes this gap between who we think we should be and who we actually are as one of the primary sources of human suffering. Not tragedy, not loss. The gap between the performed self and the real one. And the quiet life for many people is simply what closing that gap looks like. Here's where most people go completely wrong. When someone finally admits they want less, smaller, quieter, more contained, the first thing they do is try to justify it. They build a rational case. They explain it to people. They list the reasons. They read the books. They find the philosophy, stoicism, slow living, essentialism, and they use it like armor. And it doesn't work. Not really. Because the guilt doesn't live in the rational part of your brain. It lives in the part that runs threat assessments, that monitors social belonging, that has been absorbing messages about success and failure since you were old enough to be graded. You can't logic your way past a threat response. Trying to out-argue a feeling of inadequacy is like trying to reason with a car alarm. It doesn't matter how right you are, the alarm keeps going. What actually has to change is the felt sense of safety around the choice, not the intellectual understanding of it, the felt sense. And that's a different process entirely. What the research on values clarification actually suggests, and what therapists working with burnout and identity confusion see over and over again, is that the shift happens when you stop trying to defend the choice and start inhabiting it. Concretely, that means two things. First, get granular about what the quiet life actually looks like for you. Not as a category or a philosophy, but as a specific Tuesday. What does it feel like in your body to spend that Tuesday the way you actually want to spend it? The brain doesn't update on arguments, it updates on experience. The more you move toward the actual texture of the life you want, not the idea of it, the actual experience, the more that felt sense of safety starts to build. Second, find other people living versions of it. Not influencers aestheticizing simplicity, but real people who chose small and stayed there and are genuinely okay. Because social comparison is a threat mechanism, and the fastest way to diffuse it is to show your nervous system evidence that the choice is survivable, that people who made it are still standing, that your brain isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was trained to do, and it can be retrained slowly with evidence. I want to ask you something, and I actually want you to answer it. Drop it in the comments because I read every single one. When you picture your ideal Tuesday, not your ideal vacation, not your 5-year plan, just a regular Tuesday that feels genuinely good, what does it look like? Is it busy? Is it quiet? Are you alone or with people? Are you building something or just being somewhere? I ask because I think most of us have never actually described it out loud, and something interesting happens when you do. So tell me, what's your Tuesday? There's a version of maturity that nobody really talks about. The kind that isn't about expanding your life outward, but about narrowing it deliberately toward the things that are actually yours. Not shrinking, sharpening. Every culture has stories about the person who wanted more and kept going. We don't have nearly enough stories about the person who looked at more and said, I know what that costs and I'm choosing something else. That person isn't lost. That person isn't settling. That person has done something genuinely hard. They've figured out the difference between what they were told to want and what they actually do. And they've had the courage to act on the answer, quietly, without needing anyone to applaud it. You don't owe the world your maximum output. You owe yourself an honest life. Those two things are not the same thing. And for a lot of people, the moment they stop confusing them is the moment everything gets clearer.